The Prisoner from Ib. In the ancient land of Manar, beyond the desolate plains and beneath a fog-laden sky, there lay the strange and silent city of Ib. Built of mysterious green stone, Ib was home to beings of an ancient race, creatures whose bulging eyes and flabby lips whispered of secrets long forgotten. The local human tribes, who lived in scattered encampments along the marshes a fair distance away, spoke of the city with a mixture of fear and disdain, for they loathed the strange folk who dwelt there and the dark waters that surrounded their city. Among these tribes, however, there was a group of hunters, men hardened by the wilds and emboldened by a belief in their own superiority. They were driven by tales of the treasures the storytellers claimed was hidden within Ib, treasures guarded by those strange, frog-like beings who seemed as much a part of the mist and mire as the marshes themselves. And also, there was a growing sense of discomfort and dislike against these Ibians, for they moved almost exclusively during the darkest hours and could appear almost as ghosts. Although they were not aggressive, many a hunter had had run-ins with them. They also seemed to possess an unnatural magic, for their tall obelisks gleamed with an evil gleam in the night. All in all, the hunters felt that they were in their right to make a raid against the foul creatures. Their tribe would heap praise upon them and sing songs to their glory, they believed. There were 3 of them this day, a small but determined band, eager to prove their bravery and to take what they believed the strange folks of Ib didn't deserve, for they saw these creatures as lesser beings, pathetic and ripe for conquest. As the fog thickened around them, the hunters crept closer to the lake, still keeping their distance to the city. They gazed upon the steep hill that would be known as Akurion in centuries ahead. The leader of them, Nargis Bark, a man as abundantly skilled with the bow as he was arrogant, pointed towards a small group of the loathsome eyebites, bringing their catch from the lake. The hunters watched their prey, silent and calculating, convinced that these sluggish creatures could pose no threat to them. And so, with the stealth of predators stalking their prey, they prepared to strike. Without warning, 2 of the hunters descended upon the creatures, their crude weapons slashing through the fog and mist. Nargis Bark stayed behind, raining death with his arrows that seemed incapable of missing. The frogmen, taken by surprise, fell swiftly and silently, their green bulbous eyes wide, with something more akin to sorrow than fear or pain. In the end, only a single creature was left alive, seemingly a female standing silently and regarding the hunters through glazed eyes. With their captive in tow, the hunters retreated into the swamp, their minds filled with thoughts of the glory that awaited them back at their encampment and the possibility of unlocking the secrets of Ib. But the swamp, like Ib itself, was ancient and full of shadows, and as they ventured deeper, the fog seemed to close in around them, heavy with a silence that weighed upon their souls. The swamp was a place of treachery, its waters dark and still, its paths winding and uncertain. As the hunters pressed on, their captive shuffled behind them, silent and unresisting. The fog thickened, the air grew colder, and a sense of unease began to creep into the hearts of the men. It was then that the first of them began to see the shapes in the mist, vague forms that moved just beyond the edge of sight, flickering shadows that seemed to dance and sway with the movement of the fog. One by one, the hunters began to feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them, a presence that pressed against their minds with a suffocating dread. They spoke little, their voices hushed and fearful, as if the very air would betray them. For in the silence of the swamp, the mind plays tricks, and what is imagined can seem more real than what is seen. The fog grew thicker still, and with it came the whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The hunters strained their ears, but the words, if words they were, eluded them, slipping through their minds like water through a sieve. And then, sickly dim green lights began to fade in and out of existence just below the swampy waters. One by one, the hunters saw the faces of the dead, the lifeless eyes of the Ipites they had slain staring back at them from the fog, their mouths forming strange words. The mist seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and everywhere were the uncanny green lights. One of the hunters, maddened by what he saw, stumbled and fell backwards into the swamp, his scream cut short by the cold embrace of the water. Strangely, he did not come to the surface again, and the others stood frozen by terror. And it seemed a great body moved in the water before slowly fading away. As the fog pressed closer, the hunters' fear turned to anger. They looked upon their captive, and in their minds they saw not a creature of flesh and blood, but a thing of malice and dark intent, a being that had brought this curse upon them. In their desperation, they sought to blame the creature, to see in its unblinking eyes the source of their torment. One hunter, his mind frayed by fear, raised his crude dagger, intent on ending the life of the being that had brought them to this accursed place. Nargis Bak nodded his consent, and the man stood and slowly approached the silent being to end its life. However, fate would not have it so. The hunter, confused by the heavy fog, trampled badly and fell. As he tried to rise, he found himself in the grip of an irresistible quagmire that pulled him downwards. Nargis Bak immediately sought to stand and aid his companion, but again he found himself paralyzed by fear. He could naught but watch and cry out in terror as his fellow hunter disappeared. When he was gone, Nargis Bak raised his eyes and found himself silently watched by his cold, frog-like prisoner. The two stared at each other, Nargis Bak feeling the heavy weight of the loss of his comrades. He suppressed an impulse to slay the prisoner, knowing all would have been for naught without his prize. This way, he pondered, at least the glory would be all the greater when he returned as the sole survivor. He steeled himself and walked towards his prisoner, ready to continue the long, tiresome walk through the foggy marsh. And so, they continued, for many hours through the thick fog. Nargis Bak alone remained. He knew in his heart that the swamp, or whatever force was at play, would not rest until it had claimed him also. But yet his pride would not let him abandon his prisoner. He pushed and dragged the silent being relentlessly after him as he picked up the pace. They stumbled through the mire, constantly surrounded by the eerie green lights. Even unto dawn, the hunter struggled through the marshlands with his captive, at some point dropping both his pack and his bow and arrows. His mind became more and more fractured by sights and sounds that assaulted him, and he became almost oblivious to the surroundings, just progressing like through a dark and confusing tunnel. Then, in the pale light of the first dawn, he stopped, his mind and awareness emerging once again, feeling that something had changed. He looked behind him and realized the creature was gone somehow, and he was holding on to a limp rope with nothing at the end. Frustrated, he threw the rope away. He drew his final remaining weapon, a bronze dagger, determined to find his prey once again. As he looked around, he was both astounded and deeply horrified. Nargis Bak found himself back at the very lake at which they had done their dark deed more than a day ago. The air was cool and chilly in the shadow of Great Akurion, but most chilling was the rows upon rows of frog folk silently regarding him. The great hunter knew not what to do, and was again paralyzed by fear and confusion. As he stood there, more and more aware of his dire situation, the beings took up a low chant. Just one word they sang, again and again, with their inhuman aquatic voices. He was turned towards the land, but now he heard loud splashes and felt a great movement from the lake behind him, and a terrifying sensation crept up his spine. As the chanting increased, Nargis Bak turned around for the final time, turned towards the lake and what was there. Finally, as he saw, he screamed, and all arrogance and pride washed out of him, leaving only madness for the few remaining moments of his life. It would be a long time before the men of his tribe dared venture close to Ib and its denizens again. The ill-fated priest. I remember well the day I first spoke against the Ibians, those wretched beings who dared to inhabit the shores of our great lake. The city of Sarnath was young then, its walls not yet as high, nor its temple towers as grand as they would become in later years. In fact, the creature's grey stone city of Ib was larger and far older. But even then, I knew our destiny was greatness, a greatness that could not be shared with those grotesque frogmen across the water. I, Taran Ish, High Priest of Sarnath, second only to the king himself, knew that our future was not one of coexistence, but of conquest. The foul Ibians were an affront to our gods, their bulging eyes and flabby lips and jelly-like bodies a mockery of the divine. As I walked in what would later become the fabled gardens of Zokka, as yet only the royal gardens, I often argued with the other priests and nobles, and even the king and his queen. I said we must get rid of the foulness that is Ib. It is a perversion in the eyes of the gods, I told them. Great Zokalar might be gentle in many ways, but even he would condemn us, and Tamash and Lobon would surely bar us from the afterlife. So it went back and forth, with some nobles agreeing, but most arguing that the frog folk only were seen during the darker hours and did not really pose a threat to us and our growing army. We had had several encounters with them with deadly outcome for their side, but no man had seen an Ibian raise a hand in its own defense. For years I continued my campaign to awaken the wrath of my people, feeling myself pushed on by the divine, and as time went by, more and more began to see things from mine and the god's side. At first, even though he had softened his position, the king hesitated. His mind was clouded by thoughts of peace and trade. But I spoke with the voice of our gods, with the authority that had been bestowed upon me. I painted for him a vision of a world where Sarnath stood supreme, its glory unchallenged, and then with far greater riches within reach. "Great King," I said, "do you not see that it is our divine right to rule these lands, to rid them of those who are lesser, those who offend the gods with their very existence? At last, my words found purchase in his heart, and eventually he was convinced. We gathered the young warriors, and they came to arms with a fervor unseen before, carrying long spears, bows and slings, vowing to tear down the foul grey obelisks that littered the frogfolk lands, as well as to destroy the very city of Ib. My heart rose at their resolve, and I watched them streaming out of our city on their way to do the gods' will, swords gleaming in the sun, shields raised high. I watched from the shore as they descended upon that wicked city, their war cries filling the air. I felt a thrill of pride course through me when the smoke cleared and the last of the Ibians had been pushed into the depths with long spears. Our warriors returned. They brought with them treasures of Ib, strange and wondrous things that we could not comprehend. Among them was a large idol of their hideous lizard-like god, a thing of pale sea-green stone, with eyes that seemed to watch me, even from afar. Its form was grotesque, a parody of all that was sacred. They brought it to me, as was my right as high priest, to do with it as I saw fit. I took the idol and placed it in my temple, in a small side chamber on an altar of chrysolite, where the light of the moon and stars would fall upon it. I thought it a fitting place, where it would serve as a reminder of our victory, but from the moment it entered our temple, I felt a chill in the air, a creeping sense of unease that would not leave me. I decided another place would have to be found to display the idol. That night, I dreamed. Dark, twisted visions filled my mind, visions of a great shadow rising from the lake, of green stones and broken idols, of Sarnath crumbling into dust. I awoke in a cold sweat, my heart racing, my breath coming in short gasps. But I dismissed the dreams as nothing more than the remnants of a day filled with excitement and bloodshed. As I drifted back to sleep, I heard a loud noise coming from inside the temple, as if stone was grating against stone. I got up, wondering why no attendant or priest seemed to have noticed it. I took on my mantle, as I felt very cold, and went out from my chamber. In the anteroom, my attendant slept. I called on him and even shook him, but he didn't stir, so I finally let him be, and instead went ahead to find the source of the calamity. As I walked the chill stone corridors, it was quiet, and no more sounds were heard. I began to think that the noise had only been a figment of my imagination, or at least that my mind had exaggerated it. I stopped, and was about to return to my chamber. But then I heard a terrible whisper coming through the corridors, and with it a damp bone-chilling cold. "Taran Ish! Taran Ish!" it called. I felt a cold dread rush through my bones as I stood there. But I am the high priest of Zokalar, and no whispers shall keep me from the hall of my god. Fearfully, I made my way to the main chamber that held both the imposing statue of holy Zokalar, as well as the foul idol, placed in a side chamber. At first everything looked to be as it should, but then the idol slowly turned its head toward me, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It spoke to me in a voice that was not a voice, a sound that filled my mind with terror. "Taranish," it whispered. The stone idol, horribly animated, turned towards me. "Taranish, see." I fell backward from the shock and fear as I felt the unholy beast trying to enter my mind. I sought to shake its influence, but I was soon drawn into a vision far more real and horrific than those earlier during the night. The vision, cast in an eerie green light, showed me, first, the fall of Ib in all its gory detail. To my horror, I felt the pain and terror of each of the creatures as they fell, in the most excruciating way. For hours it went on, until I could feel no more, my mind and body numb. Then the vision shifted, revealing now the future of Sarnath. My spirits raised slightly as I saw our city grow over what must have been centuries. The temple towers of the gods raised high and proud, beyond what I could even have envisioned. The city became vast and powerful. Even in the state of feverish exhaustion and lingering pain I was in, I cried out with joy, though my mouth couldn't produce more than a hoarse sound. The idol, which some part of my mind understood was the source of the visions, must have taken this as a sign to continue, because the shape of the vision changed once again. I saw Sarnath again, first in its full glory hosting some kind of grand celebration, and then a long panorama over its horrific downfall. I saw shadowy frogfolk, both living and dead, rise from the dark waters and swarming the city. The eerie green lights were everywhere. I tried to tell myself it could not be true, even as I knew that it was. I tried to rise weakly, to flee from the temple, but my body would not obey. I was frozen, held in place by an unseen force. My heart raced, and I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. The idol's eyes bored into me, and I felt my mind begin to unravel. But the idol was not yet satisfied, even as I had been shown the doom of my city and our long future followed by a fall into darkness. Again it cast me into a vision. This time, the lands were barren and desolate, no humans seen anywhere. But then frogfolk appeared from the depths, raising anew the obelisks that we had just thrown into the lake. And slowly, I was forced to watch how Ib was rebuilt to new heights, and the vision progressed even further into the future, showing me men covering in fear as the name of Bokrug was mentioned. All the lands of Manar became dominated by it. Even the human kingdoms of Rokol and Ilarnek paid homage to its name. Desperation took hold as I held on to my last sanity. I grasped at the altar with trembling hands. I knew I had to leave some warning, some message to those who would come after. With the last of my strength, I took a piece of chrysolite from the altar and began to scratch a single word into its surface, my hands moving with a will of their own. Doom, I carved, the word cutting into the stone, each letter a struggle against the madness and fatigue that threatened to consume me. As I finished, the idol let out a terrible scream, a sound that pierced my very soul. The room spun, and I felt myself falling, the world fading into darkness. The last thing I saw was the word I had carved, glowing faintly in the light of the idol, a final, desperate warning to those who would find it. And then there was nothing, only darkness, and the knowledge that I had sealed the fate of Sarnath with my pride and my arrogance. I was a fool who believed he knew the will of the gods, who thought he could shape the destiny of a city. But the gods are not so easily defied, and destiny is a path not of our choosing. Sarnath is doomed, as I am doomed, and there is no escape from the wrath that awaits us all.